So we work with alcohol distributors and alcohol suppliers, most of the big names that you'll recognize, the brands that you see in the bar or in a retail store we work with. And basically said, guys, your jobs are at risk. It's going to be 18 months until we figure out, what your job's going to be and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, screw this, I am out of here. I was running their largest customer on my own at 26. By the end of the year, I was just completely fried. And I called it at the time our shotgun to sniper rifle set strategy, right? So instead of spreading far and wide, let's just hit one vertical and hit it really hard. So that's how close to the end we were. We were starting basically from scratch with no money, building a tech product for huge customers, forged in the fires of COVID, but it was probably the most painful thing I've ever done. We could really disrupt this market big time. And our business was just getting hammered. I'd already booked flights, sold my house, sold my car, so I sold everything and moved the entire family to the US without a contract.
If you have been enjoying listening to the stories of entrepreneurs across Edinburgh, then why not subscribe? If you're on YouTube, you can hit the red button down below and hit the bell to get notifications. Or if you're listening on Spotify or Apple, then subscribe to the podcast. We hope you enjoy the show.
Craig, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. Tell us a little bit about your business.
Sure. So MRM Technology is a marketing technology business, and we specialize specifically in the alcohol sector. So we work with alcohol distributors and alcohol suppliers, most of the big names that you'll recognize, the brands that you see in the bar or in a retail store we work with. And basically we have a technology product that's now called Hybel. And sales reps in the drinks industry use Hybel to create marketing materials for their customers. So this could be menus, posters, tank cards, digital media. And they can create it themselves using our app as part of their sales call. And they can do it in a way that is customized to their account. It's created on demand. So that means it's not mass produced. It's actually printed and created on demand. And then finally, it's compliant with brand guidelines and legal guidelines. And essentially what we do is we work with our customers to take them from a world where they're kind of doing this manually with graphic designers, and we take them to a new world where the sales reps can do it themselves using our technology. And that saves them a huge amount of time, money, and reduces a lot of waste in the POS supply chain. So yeah, that's what we do.
You said that a few times. It's like a very structured answer back. Yeah. So yeah, really interesting. So how did this all start? Take us back.
Yeah, so it's a very long story, so I'm not going to go all the way into it because we'll be here all day. But the business actually was founded by my parents in 2001 as a digital print business. And their kind of idea was to combine two new technologies, which was digital printing with the internet, which in 2001 was still pretty new. And they were well ahead of their time, too far ahead of their time, really. And the proposition was this idea that my dad had worked in the print industry for a very long time. And his observations and his kind of the reason he set the business up was because he had this insight that as a print supplier, it's very commoditized. It really just comes down to price. So the best way to get around that was to have a technology product that was a little bit further up the buying process, where you could actually really integrate very closely with the customer so that the order would be created and then sent to print without ever kind of going out to tender and suddenly being one of those 10 vendors that have to submit a price. So that was his insight, and they were doing that with some big name customers. And for some crazy reason, he decided to move back from America, where we were living at the time, leave the corporate world and set up his own business here in Scotland, in Alloa. Actually, it started in Alva, even smaller town. And so him and my mum and one other guy set up a business. So I think there was 3 of them and then 4 very quickly, and started a wee business in Alva. And they ran it for 10 years. So I was about 16 when they started it. So I got a kind of the inside track on a small family business. And they worked their butt off for 10 years to grow that business, and then decided to retire to sail around the world, which they are still doing today.
Brilliant. Wow.
11 years on. I saw them very recently, actually. So at that point, I joined the business. So I had followed the very conventional prescribed route that you're supposed to follow, or at least my parents told me I was supposed to follow, which was, go to university, get a degree in business, go and do an internship, go and do a grad scheme, So I did all of that. I joined the craft graduate scheme, had an amazing experience, learned a huge amount, actually got exposed to the problem that we now solve as a sales rep. So I got first-hand experience of that from the sales side and also the marketing side, which was great. And then Cadbury and Kraft came together, and Alan worked for Cadbury at the time. So he was on the opposite side of the merger. And despite Kraft purchasing Cadbury and being the bigger company, it was almost like a reverse takeover. So I could see the writing on the wall. And what happened was that basically they shut the office in Cheltenham where I worked at Kraft and moved everything into Cadbury, and basically said, guys, your jobs are at risk. It's going to be 18 months until we figure out, what your job's going to be, and blah blah blah. And I was like, screw this, I am out of here. Like, I am not waiting 18 months for you to dictate my future. I've already done this job for 18 months. And when you're like 25 or something, that's a long time. So I jumped ship. I was the first person to leave within the week. Got marched out of the office because I left for a competitor. And I think that's probably one of the first signs that maybe I wasn't destined for the corporate world. Went to join Mars. Went to run the Morrison's account, which was a big step up for me. Huge step up from what I'd done before. And then literally within a week, prior to starting, they said, Craig, how do you feel about working on the Tesco account as a team of 3? I was like, amazing. You've just fast forwarded my career by 15, 20 years, running the biggest retailer in the UK, running their biggest customer, as part of a team of 3. So I was told. And on day 1, the other 2 left. They both resigned.
Because you arrived?
Due to stress. So again, probably an inkling of what was coming. Within 3 months, I was running their largest customer on my own at 26. Wow. And it was a great experience. I learned a lot, but it took its toll big time. And by the end of the year, I was just completely fried, just really, really badly burnt out. I had chronic insomnia. It was just not in a good place. So I decided to leave without anything to go to be honest, just because I had to. I had no choice. I was done. So my wife and I went traveling around Patagonia for 3 months and kind of rebuilt myself from the ground up. And at that point, that's when my mum and dad were looking to retire. They were looking for someone to come and run the business. I didn't have a job. We did want to move back to Scotland because we were in England at the time. And it all kind of came together quite nicely, but it was not planned. It wasn't intentional. I actually had no interest in joining the family business up until that point. So, these things happen, but it worked out pretty well.
Yeah. Yes. So there's no plan at all to go into the family business?
No.
It was only because you left Mars because of, just effectively burnt out, eh?
Exactly, yeah. I mean, I'd been exposed to it a lot as a kid, obviously, around the kitchen table, hearing about it, watching my mum and dad work all day and all night. I'd been in the business quite a lot, helping out when they were busy. And then I actually left school a bit early. Once I got my grades I needed for uni, I just left immediately. Again, another maybe entrepreneurial sign there. So I went and worked for my parents for a year. So I'd had a lot of exposure to the business and kind of knew it well, but I had no intention of ever joining the family business.
But the business that you joined at the time wasn't solving the problem that you're now solving, right?
Yeah, that's right. So when I joined, it was actually at its peak over that 10-year period. So it was doing about £850,000. On the surface of it, it looked to be doing really well. Had around maybe 10 staff, maybe 12. And but once I joined, I realized that it maybe wasn't quite as rosy a picture as I had been led to believe. And I think part of that is my mum and dad had been backing out of the business for a while, going away for longer and longer spells on the boat. And when you take the 2 founders out of a business, it leaves a bit of a vacuum of knowledge and leadership and management. So basically, there was a lot of things I needed to fix. So I spent the first 2 years basically fixing the business. And that involved turning off business that didn't make any money, or didn't make sense, or for whatever reason was unattractive. And after that 2 years of fixing the business, it was actually a very profitable business, but much smaller. It was probably about just under £500,000. We had 7 people. But we were netting between 100 and 200 grand net profit. So it was a very small but very profitable business. So I said to my parents, look, I've done the best I can here. if you want to get a return on your investment of all that money and time and effort, I mean, I barely took a holiday in 10 years to get that business to where it was. I said, if you want to get a return on all that, I'd suggest you sell it, or you should invest in it, or you could milk it for a few years and that will be it. So we tried to sell it, didn't do a very good job of it, couldn't sell it. We got one offer, but it was pretty terrible. So I said to my parents, look, I can make more money in profit in 1 year than you'd get from selling that business for that amount of money. So why don't I buy the business from you? I'll take some money from the bank and I will use the profits of the business to buy you out over a period of time, which I did. And I don't want to go into it in detail, but it was probably the most painful thing I've ever done. Trying to buy a business from your own parents is a difficult thing to do. And succession in family business generally is a very difficult thing to do well. A couple of our customers are third or fourth generation family businesses, and I'm just staggered that they're able to manage that because I know what it's like. It's really hard. So yeah, I mean, cutting a long story short, I bought the business, took over the majority ownership of the business, and that gave me the freedom to kind of do more of what I wanted with it, really, which was basically to turn it on its head.
I find this funny how you had no intention of going into the family business, and then a couple of years later, you actually end up buying it and then totally transforming it, right?
Yeah, well, there's a reason for that. And when I looked at everything, we did a lot of stuff. So like, you know, we're now a very vertical focused business. We only focus on one industry sector, which is the alcoholic drink sector. But at that point, when I joined, we were horizontal. We worked across maybe 10 or 12 different sectors. We were doing everything for everyone and not doing it particularly well. But we had one part of the business that probably made up less than 10, 15% of the business, which was for some of the drinks companies. And my dad had this idea that to build some software that would allow sales reps to create wine lists themselves in a way that didn't require a designer. And you could pull that data from a database so that instead of a sales rep having to type in the name of a French wine and all its tasting notes and vintages and all that kind of stuff, they could basically just pick from a database. So within about 5 minutes, you could create like a 2 to 4 or even 8-page wine list. And I looked at this and thought, wow, that actually adds a lot of value for these customers. They were absolutely loving it. It was profitable business. It was consistent business. So it was kind of all year round. It wasn't too seasonal. And it was unique. There was no one else really doing it. So I thought, actually, you know, there's something there that works. That's a really good product. And I knew the problem it solved because as a sales rep at Kraft, I'd had the same issue trying to create POS for hospitality accounts and finding that it was just taking forever to get something very simple done. You know, take like 2 to 3 months to get a little simple coffee menu done. And the whole process was very painful and just a lot of back and forth. So, and then I saw it from the marketing angle as well, where I could see sales reps taking their own initiative and actually just creating the POS themselves, maybe on PowerPoint or with a local designer, and just, you know, with all the best intentions, but, you know, just destroying the brand guidelines, you know, because they were yanking images off Google or, you know, wherever they could find it. So I knew the problem. I had seen the problem. I'd experienced it. I knew there was a lot of pain there. And when I saw the solution, I thought, you know what, there's probably enough companies globally who have this problem, and it's painful enough for them to actually pay to solve this problem. So that's really where that kind of sparked, I guess, this idea that if I could build that product in a way that it could scale, we could sell this globally to the biggest drinks companies in the world. But the problem was the product that they built was really just a proof of concept. It was kind of like a prototype product that was built out in India, and it didn't basically, if every time we got a new customer, we had to go build another instance of it, which would take 6 months and quite a lot of money. So it didn't scale, right? So I was like, if we're going to do this, we need to build a product that we can just flip over and over and over again. So it's one product, you know, the technical term would be multi-tenanted. So it's one product, but we can have as many customers on there as we like. There's no additional cost adding customers. So I thought if we could build that, we could go and sell that. And just around that time, we were speaking to Diageo, and they came to us. And again, this is my dad started all this. You know, he had that initial conversation. They were like, "This is amazing. We want to use this globally in every market." And they said, "Look, here's what we need it to do, and here's some of the kind of the needs that we have." So taking the product we had feedback from the customers that we already had using it, plus the new insight from Diageo about what they were looking for, I decided to build a technology product from scratch to solve that specific problem in that specific sector.
Yeah.
And I called it at the time our shotgun to sniper rifle strategy, right? So instead of spreading far and wide, let's just hit one vertical and hit it really hard and be very precise about it. And then the first, if we kind of break it into three, essentially, one was to focus on one vertical. The second one was to build a scalable product.
Yeah.
And the third one was we also manage all the print supply chain that comes out the other end of the app. So when a user places an order on Haibo, we also manage the print order that then gets shipped to their customer. And at the time, we were doing all of that in-house. We were printing in-house. We had our own equipment, and we were sending orders mostly around the UK and a wee bit into Europe. And I knew, again, that wouldn't scale, right? How we're going to grow in a global business and service global customers from Alloa at the time, right? It just wasn't going to happen. So I actually shut down the print operation entirely. So they've been printing for, I think, 17 years, and I sold everything. It literally, even down to the fire extinguishers, and we shut down our in-house production altogether. So in the space of 3 months, we went from being essentially a printer to being a technology company where we had no printers, no assets, nothing but our laptops. And I built the development team here in Edinburgh because, again, hard to hire developers in Alloa. So we set up our own development hub here in Edinburgh, and went around building a new product.
And that's quite a decisive action to take as well. So how confident were you in kind of what the future was going to look like versus kind of hanging on to, I guess a well proven kind of past?
Well, I was pretty certain it was going to die if we kept doing what we were doing. I mean, I actually still have a spreadsheet on my computer that details what we would have got if we liquidated the business. So that's how close to the end we were. That's why I said you have to sell it, right? Because I just couldn't really see a future for the business until I had that kind of light bulb moment with I guess Diageo show me what could be possible if we went and built this technology. And I guess so A, we had no choice, and B, because I'd experienced the problem myself. And I managed all of our customers at that time. So I was speaking to our customers who were Molson Coors and Carlsberg and Bacardi at the time, and still are customers today. I could see how much value they were getting. I could hear it in their voice, right? I knew a lot about the product, the industry, the problem we were solving. So I felt very confident if we built the product, people would buy it. But again, there's no guarantee,
And Craig, that's the one, if we wind back a little bit, so this is a kind of a business that initially started in Alva, then to Alloa, so it's a small business. But actually, one of the things that's consistent about your business over that time is you've got some cracking clients, like global brands. So how does a wee business from Scotland manage to actually penetrate that kind of those kind of companies?
Well, I think my dad takes credit for that, really. He was the one that signed up a couple of these big customers in the early days, and what you only really need one. Once you've got one, you can then point to that as your case study, and you're off and running. So through really sheer dogged persistence, I think he managed to crack a couple of these, and kind of opened up the way for me. So we were trading with Bacardi at the time and Molson Coors. I then brought on Carlsberg, I then brought on Pernod, Diageo, and then we've just been on a tear since. So once we made that decision to build the product, which took us about 18 months to build the first version of it, and we'd outsourced the printing, it was all about selling. So I went and sold to the biggest drinks companies in the world. And generally, the feedback was like, this is awesome. Like, we absolutely have this problem. We didn't know how to solve it. This is amazing. This is exactly what we want. So...
and who are you picking the phone up to then, just out of interest? So when you go to get
so I get from my point. So this is again where my experience at Kraft and Mars was really helpful, because I knew how those organizations work. I know how they're structured. I know what roles do what. So I knew that the people I needed to be speaking to were customer marketing, trade marketing, sales directors, or maybe in their IT team or commercial effectiveness team. So I knew the types of roles. So if I wanted to sell into, say, Pernod Ricard, I could go on LinkedIn and very quickly pick off maybe 2 or 3 people that were going to be probably lead a project like this. But again, we're at the time, and even now, we're sometimes they didn't know they had that problem, or they did and didn't know how to solve it, or it was something that they just didn't have a vested interest in solving. But when you showed it to them, when you demoed the product, they were like, wow, I get it. And a lot of them had a sales background. So they'd experienced the problem themselves, right? And then experienced it from maybe a marketing or an IT angle. So there was just there was clearly a problem that needed to be solved. And we created the solution and we hit it pretty much bang on. And that comes through a huge amount of research and understanding of the market. And obviously we've developed it continuously since then. We've recently rebuilt it completely. And so yeah, I felt super confident on that. And I think one thing that, again, my experience starting my career in sales, and really the only reason I went into sales is because it was easier to get into a sales grad program than it was to get into marketing, which is actually what I wanted to do. I developed some pretty good sales capabilities. I was selling to some of the biggest retailers in the UK at a pretty young age. So I was probably a bit further ahead from my time than most people. But what I really enjoyed was kind of what we call enterprise sales, right? So selling to large organizations, long-term relationships, big value deals. I would really struggle in like a auto sales environment where you're trying to do multiple deals a day that are all quite transactional. I would be pretty poor at that, but I would say I'm very good at enterprise sales. And we've now built that muscle as a company. So we've now got a whole team of people that are brilliant at enterprise sales. And we've got a bit of a kind of recipe for success on that. So that allowed me to really kind of sell into these big companies, which is not an easy thing to do. Trying to get in the door is really hard. Trying to go through their procurement process is really hard, and then legal and IT, and like it's a mission and it takes a long time. You got to be really persistent, but I think I learned how to do that, and then I took all those learnings from each deal and rolled them into the next one, and then went after another one. So in quite short space of time, we picked up Pernod Ricard, Carlsberg across Europe, 7 different countries, Diageo in Europe, about 16 countries, and then we did the same with Bacardi. So we rolled out across Europe with pretty much all of those customers simultaneously in the 2 years after we built the product. So we just went on an absolute tear, and it was great. It was awesome. And the funny thing is, if we hadn't shut down our print operation, we couldn't have done that. Because Brexit came along, and there's no way we could have shipped all of our orders around Europe. So that we had this. So the technology and what we call our cloud printing solution. So like cloud printing is essentially this idea where it's kind of like the Airbnb of printing, right? We don't own any hotels or apartments, but we can utilize printers all over the world just through an API integration. So we can connect, like, for example, we started trading in Australia a couple of years ago. How do you find a printer to print your stuff, and how do you connect with them? How do we send our orders from our system to their system and get them printed? And we were actually one of the first companies to ever use this technology, which would allow us to send an order automatically through an API from our technology to a printer in Australia and have it produced and shipped locally. Yeah, I've never even been to Australia. Yeah, it's one of our biggest markets, and we do have a brilliant guy there now called Kelvin who manages that for us. But yeah, so that opened up the whole world to us basically. So if a customer said, and they quite frequently did, Craig, can you go set us up with Haibo in Mexico or Brazil or Canada or wherever? We're like, yeah, sure. Like,
so really scalable.
Yeah, so we went from like just working in the UK to working in 26 countries in about 2 years. Yeah, we now work in over 50, which I still actually can't wrap my head around. So yeah, we've been very international really from day one. Yeah. So
and over that time then, Craig, as well, so kind of, in terms of where we're at in the timeline, the business has grown initially from your mum and dad and the third person to, what kind of scale are we at now in terms of team size? And because we're now in Edinburgh, I guess, at this point, aren't we?
So we set up an office in Codebase, which is a tech incubator in Edinburgh, and when we started, I think there was only 2 of us in a hot desking space, and then we maybe went to 4 to 6 to 8 to 10, and we kept having to move into a new office because we kept running out of space. There's only so many times you can reorganize it to create more space. We were cramming people in. So I think we maybe got up to about maybe 12 people in Edinburgh, and we had maybe another 10 in Alloa, roughly. So it was maybe 20, maybe up to 30 people around that time. Yeah. But it just grew really nicely. You know, one of the benefits about focusing on a specific vertical is that you can invest all your resources into the needs of that one specific sector. So if one customer says, like, I need this particular feature or this product, chances are all your customers are going to need it. So there's real benefit to building a product feature because it's going to benefit all of your customers, not just one or some of them. The other one is that it creates a lot of organic business. So almost all of our business was coming through referrals, where people would leave one company, join another company, and take us with them. Or they would even recommend us to a friend that worked for another company, even if it was a competitor. And then obviously our reputation grew in the industry, and we suddenly became known for this. So people were seeking us out. And even to this day, we get like referrals almost on a weekly basis. So it's a very, like, almost no cost of customer acquisition. We're not spending any. We only just had our first marketing team, almost over 20 years. So it's very kind of beneficial from that point of view. And then obviously combined with our ability in enterprise sales, we were able to go after the biggest customers in the world and win that business, which is pretty cool for what at the time was a very small business based in Scotland.
And so you've gone, it's an established business, but it almost feels like a startup, you know, because you've totally changed the whole model, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, after the MBO, we were effectively a startup. In hindsight, I would have actually liquidated and started again, because it would have opened up more funding options. But yeah, it was basically a different business. You know, we had different people, we didn't print. Our business model was different. We were now investing vast amounts of money in technology. You know, we brought our development in-house. That was really important to me, so I could sit with our developers and really share the problem with them and work with them on finding the solutions. So it became a completely different business, and we also had no money. So obviously I used the money that was in the business to buy the shares back from my mum and dad. So we were starting basically from scratch with no money, building a tech product for huge customers. So it was pretty hardcore bootstrapping. You know, with the combination of the profits from the legacy business that we had, combining that with some government grants from Scottish Enterprise, those two things basically funded the first version of the product. But we did it on an absolute shoestring. You know, we didn't even have enough money to buy chairs. We were borrowing chairs from other offices. It was pretty full on.
Thank goodness for standing desks, eh? No chairs required.
I mean, it was lean and mean, but I loved it. And a lot of us who are still in, you know, we've got a lot of people who are still in the business now that were there at that time, and we often kind of hark back to those days and think very fondly of them. But at the time, it's always tough, but that was particularly tough.
And so from funding the growth of the business, then you've gone through kind of quite a funding journey then, eh?
Yeah, for sure. So as I said, like the business was bootstrapped for 20 years, right? From 2001 to 2020, everything was done through funding it ourselves. My mum and dad funded it from the start. You know, they put in their own money. And then running it off profits, right? The old school way of running a business. It's coming into vogue now. Now the tech sector has kind of gone backwards a wee bit. But and I think I had no choice, right? Like when I ran the business in the early days to not make a profit, because how are you going to pay the bills and pay your staff and pay yourself if you're not making profit? So I learned, you know, how to make a profitable business, you know, very early on, out of nothing, but I had no choice, right? I had to for survival. So that's where it changed a bit, where suddenly we were having to invest heavily for growth, right? So if you want to go build a technology product, particularly when we did it initially, it's a really expensive game, right? You know, software developers are very highly paid, they're very sought after. And building technology is really damn hard. Like, you know, if you look at your phone and you look at, let's say you bring up Uber, you know, it looks dead simple, right? It looks easy, right? But the workings behind that are just incredibly complex. The huge amounts of time and effort and money has gone into building that and making it as easy as it is. And I probably didn't fully appreciate that when I first built a product. I also thought once you build it, maybe that's it done. No, absolutely not. No, that's just the start. So, you know, I'd never built a software product in my life when I first built the first version of Highbolt. There was a lot of learnings, but I had an amazing team, amazing CTO. Some of the software developers that joined us are still with us now, and we built a great product. So that was great, but it took cash to do it, right? And eventually profits and government funding kind of gets you so far. But I realized in 2019 when we doubled the business in a year, it just put immense pressure on our cash flow. And we had been using things like invoice financing because one of the downsides of dealing with big customers is that they pay pretty slow. So we were having to deal with that, and we were also having to fund ahead of the curve all the time. So funding, we spent all the money on the product for 18 months, right? You don't get a return until the day you start actually selling something through it, and then beyond. So there's quite a long return on investment when it comes to building a SaaS technology product. So we needed cash to be able to fund the business because we were going to outgrow our balance sheet basically if we kept growing at that rate. So in 2019, I realized that we needed external funding. So I went out to market. Cut a long story short, I ended up with 2 term sheets on my desk in February 2020. And to be honest, at that point, I was not that keen on taking either of them. And the reason for that is because I'd ran the business entirely myself, off profits for a number of years, was in full control of the business. I didn't have a boss. I didn't have a contract. I was in complete control of the business. And when you take other people's money, suddenly you give up a lot of control. Depends on the deal you do, but suddenly you're signing up. When you take other people's money, it's a big deal, right? Like they want that money back and they want a return, and they also want to make sure that you don't misspend it. So you have to sign up to a lot of what they call consents. So if you want to say hire somebody over a certain value, you need to go and seek consent for that. So suddenly I was like, oh, that's a lot of rules, like I don't really like rules. I was like, there's a good chance I'm going to break those just by accident, because I'm just so used to not having to consult someone before I'd make a decision. So I wasn't kind of that kind of positive about it, but then COVID hit and suddenly I was like, this is our lifeline. Like this, we absolutely need this. And we can go into the whole COVID story later, but yeah, so we took our first funding from BGF, British Growth Fund, in 2020. Although we signed the deal in March 2020, literally as COVID was bringing the earth to a standstill, and our industry was getting shut down. We managed to secure that funding and get it over the line in August 2020, after the first lockdown and before the second one, and that was amazing.
That's a fairly tense time, though, isn't it? From the March through to the August of just will we or won't get the funding.
It was full on. I mean, obviously lots of businesses have been impacted by COVID, and probably people have got a lot of similar stories to mine, but obviously our customer, the hospitality outlets, restaurants, hotels, nightclubs, pubs, etc., were closed. Right? They had to close. They were legally obliged to shut down their business. And therefore our customers shut down that part of their business. So at that time, we were largely dealing with what they call on-premise or on-trade. So those are the people that service the hospitality industry. Because the customers were closed, they furloughed their sales teams. So suddenly the users of our product disappeared. So we went from having our best ever month in March to almost nothing in April. Like all we had was software license fees. All the transactional print revenue that comes through the app just stopped entirely. So, there's not many times that happens to a business where you just essentially cease trading and your income just stops. So suddenly you're then looking at your cash and thinking, well, how long can we survive on the amount of cash that we had in the business? And again, we could spend hours talking about our COVID response, but basically we knew what we needed to do because when I'd taken over the business originally, I'd returned it to profitability by pulling certain levers. And when you have a moment like that, whether you lose a large customer or a pandemic happens and your revenue declines rapidly, it's actually, I would say, easier than growing a business because the decisions you need to take are very obvious and they're very impactful. So, ceasing all your spending, non-essential spending, we had reduced working hours. We unfortunately had to make redundancies. We had to use furlough. We knew what all the levers were to pull, and we pulled them all within a week.
Wow.
So, because I knew we had to act fast and we had to kind of cut deep fast to extend our runway as long as possible. Because at that time, we didn't know how long this was going to last. So, our team did a phenomenal job of dealing with that situation, which meant that we extended our runway long enough to be able to secure that funding. So, yeah, I remember clearly, like during COVID, the weather happened to be particularly good. So most people were furloughed. A lot of people were furloughed. They were outside having fun. Whereas like we were inside all day, every day, all night, working on keeping the business alive, and then also raising this funding as well. Which for anyone who's been through a funding process knows it's like having a second job. So it was pretty full on. But when we kind of finally signed that deal in 2020, it was incredibly satisfying because I knew that, we could survive. I knew that it would secure people's jobs. And it also allowed us to return a bit of money again to my mother and father, who still had a few shares in the business. So we were able to sort of send them a check, which was really rewarding. And also it put money into the business to allow us to grow.
Yeah.
So from that point on, we just put the foot down. Even though we had a second pandemic that ceased our trading again for another 3 or 4 months, we just went flat out. We didn't cut anything. We just continued building the product, continued building the team, continued going after new business. So when we came out of COVID, so 2 years later, we'd actually grown the business 40%, despite our sector being closed for
Incredible.
a long period of time. So as much as I kind of, when I think about that, I actually think about it quite positively. Like for me, that I was in my element. I love those type of moments. It just suits me really well. And the way the team responded, and to watch people just step up and take on that responsibility. And I think it really kind of forged some very strong relationships in the team as well. Like literally forged in the fires of COVID.
Yeah.
The huge amount of trust built during that time within our team. And so, yeah, we came out of it stronger, bigger, probably arguably leaner. And then we've just kind of gone on a bit of a tear since then, to be honest.
So go on then, tell us more about the tear then.
So, yeah, what that funding allowed us to do was really basically hire the best talent. So, up until that point, we were self-funded, and it was hard to afford the best talent. Actually, it was impossible. So you're kind of limited to kind of sort of incremental growth to what you can actually afford. Whereas suddenly if you've got some funding, you've got the cash to go and make some big hires and really step the business forward. And I knew that if I wanted to grow the business, I couldn't do it all myself, right? I couldn't do every new business deal. I couldn't and run the business and do all of this stuff at the same time. So I knew I had to build a management team in order to allow them to run the business and allow me to focus on the more visionary activities. So that's what most of the funding was used for, was actually hiring a really phenomenal management team. And that allowed us to really scale the business. So for me, one of the biggest opportunity that I could see in prior years was the US market. So I lived in the US between the ages of 12 and 16. So I went to high school there. I've been there, I think, over 29 times. My visa report tells me. So I'm pretty familiar with the country. I now live there as well.
Just back from there.
Yeah, just flew in last night. So, so it's a market I was pretty familiar with. And it's obviously massive, right?
Yeah.
So America's kind of like 50 countries, really. But they all speak the same language, and it's basically one large commercial market. And it's also the biggest and most profitable market for the drinks industry. So it was a bit of a no-brainer that we wanted to do business there. So it'd been on my, I don't know, probably 7 years now. It's been on my list to go and crack that market. So in 2016 and 17, I made about 3 or 4 trips over to the US to kind of just really do market research, speak to people and get a feel for what the opportunity looked like. And through the Global Scot Network, which is a kind of program where Scottish people who have moved overseas and been very successful want to give back by helping other Scottish businesses. So I managed to meet a chap called Paul Ross, who worked for Edrington, a big Scottish whiskey company. He was actually the president of their US business at the time. And literally I had a 20-minute call with him, told him what we did. He was like, that's awesome. And he gave me introductions to some of the biggest distributors that they worked with in the US.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, just amazing. And in the US market, they have what they call a 3-tier model. So they basically have suppliers, so people like Diageo, Edrington, Pernod, and same on the beer side. Then they have distributors that sit in the middle, and their job is to sort of distribute the product, but also sell and market it, because it's illegal for the supplier to sell directly to the account based on that model. And then the third tier is the account itself. So actually in the US market, it's the distributor that does the bulk of the sales and marketing effort rather than the supplier, which is quite different from the European market. So I knew that the distributors were our ideal customers. So he was able to give me introductions to some of the big ones that they used. So despite, I think I was like maybe 30 at the time, and we only just released our product. Like it was, I think, a couple months old. Quite ambitiously, I went over to the US and started trying to sell into these huge distributors. And I mean, it was so... I actually stayed with a friend of a friend that I never met in Washington. He actually attended some of the meetings with me, despite knowing nothing about the sector, just to give me some sort of moral support. And otherwise I was just a kid going into these like huge buildings in New York. So his name is Des, and I probably wouldn't be here if it wasn't for some people like Des and Paul helping us out along the way.
Yeah.
And so I remember those meetings very clearly. I think I had 5 or 6 with various different US distributors on the East Coast. And the feedback was quite mixed, shall we say. They were like, look, the product looks amazing. This is great. We love what you're doing. However, you're based in the UK. You've got no US knowledge. Yeah. You don't understand the US market. Your product's too advanced for us. Like, we can't get there. We don't have the product data available to run the product, run the technology. Some of them even said, we don't really care about efficiency and trying to make this faster or quicker or save money, because we just charge it back to the suppliers. Some of them said obviously we have a contract with an incumbent vendor. There's things that are above my pay grade that I can't, that mean we can't move away from that vendor. So there was all these reasons why unfortunately we couldn't trade at that time. But in hindsight, we were far too early. Like, we couldn't have dealt with it, not even remotely. But what it did give me was a real understanding of what their needs were. Yeah. And I also recognized that they weren't there yet. Kind of like my mum and dad, we were too far ahead of our time. And you're going to need to meet the customer where they are. Yeah. And there was some fundamental reasons why we couldn't trade at that point. The biggest one really being we lacked the product data. So we need really rich product data. We need to have really high quality imagery, descriptions of the products, ABVs, ingredients, all that kind of stuff to really make the app run. And they just didn't have that because at that time there was no e-commerce in that industry. There is now, and that was the thing that really changed the game for us. So anyway, I kind of came home with my tail between my legs, and didn't come away with anything really other than a huge amount of knowledge. And some relationships. And then the following year, I went out to the biggest industry event in what they in the US call the beverage alcohol industry. So I went to the wine and spirits wholesalers event in Florida. Went over on my own dime, as the Americans say. Just 2 of us. Stayed in this cheap hotel around the corner because we couldn't afford the actual proper hotel, the official hotel you'd stay at. And we exhibited. And there was 2 things that I came away with from that. One was that, firstly, we came away with no new business. So it wasn't very effective from that point of view. But what I did do was I learned a massive amount, just walking around, speaking to the other technology vendors. One of those, the CEO of one of those vendors is now on our board. So I met him in 2017. He ran a business called Go Spot Check. And they were working with all the clients that we wanted to work with. Yeah. They were already up and running. And they were were very successful, very well run. I thought that's what I want to do. I want to emulate what they've achieved. And so I learned a huge amount from those folks, made some amazing relationships, which I still have to this day. I'm actually speaking with Matt later at our board meeting. And but the biggest insight was that there was one company that basically dominated this space. And they worked with the majority of distributors and suppliers. And they were at the event, and they'd actually picked up pretty much the marquee display. So as you came into the big 5-star hotel, they had a huge stand. So I mean, it must have cost a fortune, probably $100,000, if not more. And what was interesting about it is that I never saw a single person on the stand. So I'm sure they had people there. I'm sure they were in meetings, probably in suites and stuff, but there was nobody ever on the stand. So I obviously spent quite a bit of time there, snooping around and picking up some leaflets, and they had some free coffee, which was good because we didn't have enough money to buy the coffee in the hotel. But what that signaled to me was complacency. And if you think about it, I'd spent my own money to travel halfway across the world to attend this event and go on a stand for 3 days, which again, the chairs were too expensive. So we actually stood for 3 days. Yet they hadn't bothered to put anyone on the stand for the majority of the time. And I thought, you know what, that smells like complacency.
Yeah.
And that smells like an opportunity to disrupt these guys and this market. So that kind of was pretty firmly locked in my brain that A, there's a huge opportunity here. B, it's not quite ready yet for us. And C, there's a competitor here who's ripe for disruption. So, all the ingredients were there for success, but it took us many, many more years to finally crack it.
And how did you're saying you smelled complacency? How did you then confirm that your intuition was right, that they were indeed a complacent?
I spoke to their customers.
Right, okay. What questions did you ask them to kind of tease that out?
Yeah. So, I don't want to kind of speak ill of a competitor, but it felt to me like a company that hadn't invested in technology in a long time. Yeah. And in fact, were taking investment out of their client services team as well.
Right.
And, it's the same with any, if any company becomes particularly dominant, quite often they can fall foul of hubris and they become complacent and they start, maybe not investing in the business or making the right decisions. You see it all the time. So for me, it felt like if we could come in with a technology product, we could disrupt this big time because everything was done manually through graphic designers. Not only was the artwork created manually, but it was then printed in-house in one location. So the shipping times were very long, the turnaround times were really slow. And then also from a sort of client management point of view, it was all very manual. So a lot of the reporting and administration and what they have in the US called chargebacks, where they met the sort of cost of the marketing materials as charged back to suppliers, it was all done manually. And I thought, man, like with technology, you could make this so much more efficient, right? We could save a huge amount of man hours, save a huge amount of cost, and get the turnaround time down from like 2 weeks down to like a few days. And in this industry, it's all about speed. So the drinks industry, and specifically, it's a very, what I'd call like a fast turn market. So there's new promotions, new products, new activations constantly. Almost every day there's a new activation or season or whatever it is kicking off. So there's a really fast turn of point of sale in order to drive the sale of those products. And therefore you have to be able to respond fast, right? And allow the sales reps to respond fast. So the combination of our technology, so Hybo allowed them to design and create the POS in a few minutes with their customer, get the approval then and there. So they could literally do something that might have taken them days. They could do that in 5 minutes on our app, design some customized POS that's brand compliant, legally compliant, a few minutes, press go. We then ping it to through the air to a printer that's as close to they are. So for example, in the US now, we're going to be, for customers in Hawaii, we'll be printing in Hawaii. Whereas previously it used to get shipped from the middle of the country across the Pacific, which you can imagine how much that costs and how much carbon it uses, right? And how much time it takes. We're now going to be printing, very close within a 2-day shipping time of anywhere in the US, using the best printers in the world. So I knew that if we could combine our technology with this cloud printing solution, and obviously with our sort of professional services, implementation, design, account management, support, customer success, all those elements, we could really disrupt this market big time because we were selling a fundamentally different proposition that would transform the industry really from something that's very manual, very slow, very inefficient to something that's fast and quick and easy. And our own customers have likened it to Uber, right? The difference between taking a yellow taxi and an Uber. That's how drastic this change is. And we've now kind of implemented over 100 sales teams around the world on Hybo. So we've taken all of our customers through that journey, right? And so we're not just selling a technology product in a printed menu or something that comes out the end. We're actually selling almost business transformation, digital transformation. We're taking an old clunky process and we're inserting technology to make it faster and cheaper and more effective. And we help that customer go through that transition because it's a big change for their business. And we aid that through our professional services team. So, and because we've done it numerous times in many countries with different customers, we've learned a lot over that time. So we've got really, really good, not only at enterprise sales, but actually at implementing with these large organizations. So, I was very passionate about that opportunity. We had to kind of put it on hold for a wee while because, as I said, we were too far ahead of time. We didn't have the data, so we focused on our European growth. And then obviously COVID kind of came along. But on my flight over, I was listening to some of your previous podcasts, and there was a brilliant one with Tony Crolla. And I've had the pleasure of meeting Tony, a fantastic guy. And he told a few stories about where they had a particularly dark time that led to a new opportunity that they hadn't foreseen. And we had one of those during COVID. So in June 2020, I think at that point we were confined to our houses, or at least our postcodes, or as they would say in America, zip codes. And our business was just getting hammered, and we were actually in the middle of having to go through redundancies because our business was that badly affected. The biggest opportunity I could have ever wished for occurred literally at that point when I wouldn't say I was down, but it was a tough period. So in our darkest moment, the biggest opportunity we could ever have imagined happened.
So how did that happen? Drink of water.
Well,
story.
Yeah, it's a long story, but again, like the short version essentially is that these things, sometimes people talk about luck or things just happening, but this wasn't luck. This happened as a result of 6 years of persisting, of trying to crack this market, trying to understand it, building relationships, building network. And it started with a podcast. So I listened to an outrageous number of podcasts. I think I listened to 5 just yesterday on the flight over. I love it. I think it's just a brilliant way to learn. And it's really satisfying to now be on podcasts like this and be able to share our story and our learnings with other people and for their benefits. I'm starting to give back. And so we're in our darkest moment in June 2020, but all of this was built on the work we'd done before, and probably a year or maybe even 2 prior to that, I'd listened to a podcast that's specifically about the drinks industry. It's called Liquid Assets. It's run by Rabobank. And I listened to it, one podcast on the way home from work one day, back in the day when we had an office and we drove home from work every day. I'd listen to podcasts, listen to this particular podcast. And when I was at home working out in my home gym, in my garage, as they say in America, I looked at my LinkedIn profile and I could see that the host from the podcast had looked at my LinkedIn profile, and I thought, that's kind of weird. How on earth did he know I was listening? I think it's because I clicked on it from LinkedIn. But anyway, I thought, well, that's interesting. Maybe what I'll do is I'll reach out to the guy, because if I could get on this podcast, which I still haven't done, by the way, that could be a great kind of marketing opportunity, right? Yeah. Get in front of the right people in the US market. So I reached out to the guy and said something to the effect of, look, really loved your show, and I did. It was brilliant. And, if there's ever an opportunity to help you with some of your research or some of your podcasts, we're happy to help out. And he responded almost immediately and said, Craig, I'd love to do that. He's like, I'm doing a big bit of research on the European market. Could you spare some time? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. 3 hours later, we had a very deep conversation about the drinks industry. He's one of the smartest people I've ever met, and quite bonkers. And he also, so we had this really great conversation. I shared it as much as I could with him. And then I connected him with some of our customers and also some of our employees who had more information to share. So I kind of helped him out a wee bit and didn't really think much of it. And then a little bit later, maybe 6 months, a year later, when we were hiring in the US, he decided he kind of off his own back just introed me to a few people that he thought could be useful people for me to know and give me some insight. And then, so I spoke to a number of different people from the connections he made. And when we hired our first role in the US, one of those people applied for that position. And which was great. So we interviewed him, and he's an amazing guy, amazing pedigree. And, we'd have loved to hire him, but he was too expensive. Only now have I realized how expensive it is to operate in America. But at that time I didn't really know. So I was like, wow, holy smokes, we can't afford that as much as we'd like to hire him. So as part of the interview process, we actually gave him a demo of the product. And we do that as part of most of our interviews, to be honest, to kind of really, share that with the candidate and put it in context. But we also know that sometimes if we don't hire people, they often, if they've seen the product, they know it, they like it, if they go to another drinks company, there's a pretty good chance they might end up being a customer, right? So that was one of those situations where we demoed the product, sort of pitched him on it, really. Unfortunately, we couldn't bring him on because I said we just couldn't afford it. And again, a couple of months later, I get an email from him because he was definitely going to leave that company. I knew he was going to go somewhere in the drinks industry. He could have gone anywhere. But I get this email, and his name's Nathan. It's Nathan@sgws.com. And SGWS stands for Southern Glazers Wines and Spirits, which is the biggest distributor of wines and spirits in America. Potentially the world. I don't know of anyone bigger. $25 billion company. Somewhere between 20 to 25,000 employees. Ginormous sales team. So, when in marketing speak, you have a ideal customer profile. That was them. They were literally in my ideal customer profile. So I get an email from Nathan at sgws.com. I'm like, wow, he could have gone anywhere. And he's gone to be the VP of e-commerce at the biggest distributor, potentially in the world, definitely America. And I'm like, wow, that's amazing. And then he's introducing me to the son of the CEO, Wayne Chaplin. He introduced me to Mark Chaplin. And because he was looking for a technology product like ours. It's just one of those moments where you're like, wow, that is incredible. I mean, I remember even just from that email, I was just buzzing because it was such a dark moment for the business. And, we were literally having to go through redundancies, which is just a horrible process for everyone involved. And at that really dark moment, this opportunity came out almost out of nowhere. And I was like, this is the moment. This is our opportunity. Right? I've been in this game long enough to know those don't come around. Yeah. Either ever or often. And I've been doing this for 11 years now, right? So I was like, this is our opportunity to crack America. And not only crack it, but with the biggest distributor in America. To put it in perspective, there's twice the size of the next largest distributor. I think they have around 36% market share. So they're a Goliath. And a phenomenal company. So that kind of kicked the whole thing off. I had a phenomenal conversation with Mark. I still remember it to this day, walking around my garden in the sun, still kind of locked down. He immediately saw the value in our technology, just instantly. He had worked in sales, had done that field sales role, had worked in those different positions. So he had the context and the understanding to really understand the scale of the problem and how this solution would massively improve their business in terms of saving time, money, reducing waste, and most importantly, giving their sales reps a huge competitive advantage.
And just a quick kind of question there. How quickly do people get the opportunity?
It's quite binary, I would say, that either get it immediately or they don't.
Okay.
And a lot of that comes from, as I said, we've got some amazing best practice now on how to sell this.
Yeah.
And the way that at least I do it is I really just dig into the problem first to make sure that they either understand it or recognize it. Sometimes they know it inherently. They're like, absolutely, I know that problem. Like you can see them nodding. They're like, yep, I've been to those warehouses full of obsolete POS. I've had a car full of POS in the back of my car that I end up having to dump because it's generic and not relevant for our customers. I've spent weeks trying to create a simple order for a customer and then lost that business because I couldn't respond quick enough. So people who've had that experience, they get it immediately. And then those who haven't, that can be a bit more of a struggle, but most of the time we get it. We kind of are able to explain it, understand, really kind of delve into that pain, kind of allow, get a common understanding of what the implications of that problem are. And then we say, well, here's a different way to do it. Here's a better way to do it. Here's how we've done it for other customers. Here's what the future could look like for you if you made this change. And 9 times out of 10, our strike rate's pretty good. They're like, yeah, let's do this.
And is it just getting and listen, I don't mean to kind of undermine the amount of effort you put in, but does it just get easier and easier? The more good quality customers that you support to then be able to say, well, here's another case study. Is it?
Yeah, I would never say it's easy.
Yeah, that's the wrong word.
Because
maybe.
The process of selling into large enterprises is just so tough, so bureaucratic. There's so many obstacles and hurdles you have to clear along the way, and it's a very intense process. So that doesn't necessarily get easier, but when you've got experience of doing that over and over again, it definitely at least becomes faster and easier in that respect. But I would say that I could almost do it in my sleep now. Like I've just done it that many times, and I've heard every objection. Probably, I'm sure there'll be some new ones, but I've heard most of them. I understand the problem inherently. I've seen it in multiple different countries and different companies and different organizations. So I understand it really deeply, but our team also understands it as well, right? We've got a brilliant commercial team and a new business team who all get it as well, right? So they can do this as well. It's not just me. And we've fine-tuned that over a long period of time.
Yeah.
And then with this particular opportunity, again, like this is a good example of how it's not easy. Mark saw the opportunity, saw what the value we could bring, and was dissatisfied with what the service he was getting at the time. And, I think it was really just an idea at that early stage. And, but he took it to his team, his kind of technology team and his leadership team. And we kind of remember doing the demo, and they were like, this is awesome, but we need to go do some proof of concepts, right? Before we make a change of this scale, right? Which for their business, they've been working that way with that particular vendor for 15 years. Yeah. And prior to that, they did it all in-house. So they had their in-house design and print sort of studios. So for them to move to a technology solution and a cloud printing solution with a company from Scotland, that's quite a big change. There's risk involved. So obviously to de-risk it, we ran 4 proof of concepts in Arizona and Florida, both in on-premise and off-premise. And despite running them through COVID, right, through all the restrictions and the lockdown, and we couldn't travel to the US for 18 months because we literally were not allowed in, we ran those proof of concepts and they went really well. The feedback was amazing. The sales reps were really excited about what it did for them, right? Allowed them to service their customers better, allow them to support more customers, hit activation goals that previously they had missed entirely because they couldn't respond quick enough. So we were getting some great feedback. So we knew we were onto something, and the feedback was really positive, but there was also some negative feedback, I guess, or constructive feedback around the product, and we realized that we had to make some pretty significant kind of changes to make that product fit better for the market. So that kicked off a whole other project around rebuilding the product from basically scratch. So we've just released the new version of the product just in the last couple of months. But really, from those proof of concepts, once we had successfully achieved those, which again took at least a year to 18 months, we then had to go into an RFP process, so an official procurement process, where we went head to head with our existing vendor and one other, and had to go through an extremely thorough procurement process, which again, it really helped that I'd done this several times already with big companies, and as had my colleagues. So we were able to put together what I asked them. So I actually went to them and said, we need to put together the best RFP response we've ever done and may ever do. And, the guys just worked their socks off and created probably the most detailed response that they've ever had. And by that point, we knew that, I guess we'd sold the idea, right? That they were bought into the idea, but what it was more about was mitigating the risk of actually implementing, because it's a big business change, as I've said. So we put a huge amount of detail in our RFP about how are we going to make this change with you? How are we going to train your sales reps? How are we going to implement the software? How are we going to integrate our data? All the different components of that, because it's quite a complex operation on both sides. So anyway, we managed to go through that process. I think in the December 22, we were told you've become the sort of preferred vendor. That then gets into a procurement negotiation, which lasts another sort of 3 months, going through pricing. Then you're into IT security. So, and again, like if you want to operate or work with $25 billion companies, it's the 11th largest private business in America. If you want to work with companies like that, you need to have some pretty damn good IT security, right? You need all the different certifications, the ISO standards and stuff. So that was really thorough, having to go through that process. And then once you've done that, you then have to get onto legal and do the contract.
All sounds really easy at the moment.
I mean,
like the barriers to entry on doing enterprise deals are massive, right? So unless you're incredibly persistent and you've got some experience doing this, it's a blocker. It's a real roadblock for companies to do this. And I can see why small companies often don't make it through, because they just don't have the cash or the manpower or the resource or the accreditations to do it. So once we got through that, we finally signed it in May. or early June, which funnily enough was 3 full years after that original conversation. 3 years. But yeah, we won the deal with the biggest distributor of wine and spirits in America.
Superb.
Just amazing. And the challenge for us though was that I always felt like we were going to win it. Right? I'm naturally quite an optimist. But because it was so large, we knew that we couldn't just win it and then stand up the team and the product and implement it, because we knew we'd have to start implementing immediately. So while we were running that kind of procurement process, if you will, we were also scaling up the business to deal with the business once we won it. And again, that was a bit of a punt because there's no guarantees you're going to win it. So we took more funding.
Yeah.
We rebuilt our product from scratch, poured a huge amount of money into our technology to make it more customizable, more flexible, and refresh the UI. So, and really, we had a lot of feedback from those POCs, so we addressed all of that in the product rebuild. So the product looks amazing now. And because I knew that the biggest barrier really was adoption from the users and engagement, because we're taking sales reps who previously have wrote an email to a graphic designer, and now we're saying, actually, you need to do this yourself using this technology. So it's quite a big change for those folks. So the easiest way to make that change is make the technology easier to use, right? So we placed a huge focus on that. We had to build out a supply chain in the US. So we had to build out our print network from scratch. We had to build out our team, and then build out all the systems and processes that would allow us to deal with a customer of that scale. And we did all of that without a contract. So it was, there was, I probably haven't had a moment, there's probably been a few moments where we've had to kind of bet the farm, right, and risk it all. But we had to do that over and over and over again. And the deal just kept taking longer and longer. So that was pretty intense. But our investors were very supportive. Our team, just done a phenomenal job getting us ready for that. And we are now just a few weeks away. So we're now in September. At the end of September, we're going live in, I think, 6 or 7 different states. The biggest being Texas, which has a few thousand sales reps. So to put that in perspective, they have more sales reps in Texas than some of our customers do globally.
Wow.
So Texas will be our biggest customer, just one state.
That's mental.
Which is it's quite mind-boggling, really, when you think about it. So the team are really excited. Everyone's like super engaged. It's a massive project for us, as for the customer as well. So everyone's just fully kind of at capacity trying to make this happen.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. So, and at the moment we've got quite a few of our people over there. So as I said, I moved over there. I moved 3 days after the contract was signed. I'd already booked flights, sold my house, sold my car. So I sold everything, basically, other than my bike and our clothes, and moved the entire family to the US without a contract in place.
Surely that's the definition of optimism, eh? Doing all of that.
Well, I mean, the phrase we used, things like all in, go big or go home, like it really was binary, right? We're either going to win this and go through the roof, or we're not. And it's not going to be great.
In those quiet moments when, it's like 10 o'clock at night and you lie down after the day, like there must be so many, like how do you process like the chaos? Like what do you do to like deal with it? Just the endless, like what you've achieved is incredible. How do you deal with that?
Well, sometimes I don't. I mean, I only got 4 hours of sleep last night. So sometimes you don't. But it really comes down to building a really strong team. Like I think one of my biggest realizations over this 11 years I've been running the business is it's all about the people. If you can get the best people and have them work well together and have them really engaged and enjoying their work, like that's what it's all about. Like a company is just a group of people. It's just like a sports team. So if you can get the best players on the pitch and you can get them working well together, then there's pretty much nothing you can't do. So I realized, for the first few years of the business that I did do a lot of heavy lifting, and the analogy I kind of use is like, it felt like doing a deadlift. Like it was all me. I was pulling it from the ground up in terms of like new business and stuff like that. And obviously the team were delivering it. But then once it got to a certain size, once you get to like 10 people, you can't do everything yourself. Right? It's just ridiculous. So that's when I realized that if I want to grow this business and scale it globally and build a really big business, I need to have a team, a management team, and a team beyond that. So we've gone from 10 people in, say, 2015. We've now got almost 100. We've got people in Scotland, London, Australia. We've now got a growing team in America. And I think my realization was that I can't do all the heavy lifting. Right? We have to share the load. And the way to create leverage is to build that team, hire people that are better than you, smarter than you, with expertise in specific areas where you're weak. And I think once I had that realization, I was like, right, like it's all in. Like, let's hire people that can do this better than I can. And I'll just focus on the small number of things I'm pretty good at. And that's really been allowed us to take on these big opportunities and allow me to sleep at night, because I have a whole team who are managing this every day. And we've delegated the work out. It's really well managed. And I think one of the big ones for me was, I read a book that Alan actually recommended to me called Rocket Fuel, which is by Gino Wickman and another chap who created EOS, and with another book called Traction. And they have this model called the visionary and the integrator. And the idea really is that the visionary is the person that's kind of thinking forward, thinking about new products, new ideas, doing new deals, managing the big relationships, thinking about strategy, building culture. And then the integrator is the person who's executing. They're the person that actually is at the coalface, operating the business, managing it day in, day out, and basically executing the visionary's idea. And once I read that, I was like, holy smokes, I am a total visionary. Like, you can score yourself. I was like really high on visionary, really low on integrator. And I'd been trying to do both for a long time. Yeah. And the analogy I used for the team was like, it's like trying to, like in a pirate boat, for example, it's like being in the bird's nest or the crow's nest, right? Looking for icebergs or islands, right? In the visionary seat. And then every constantly having to run down the bloody mast to scrub the decks, right? And like,
that's a good way to say it.
Yeah, and I was too busy scrubbing the decks to get up into the crow's nest to see what was coming next. I knew that if I wanted to take the business forward, I needed to be up there, and that's actually where I'm most capable, and it's sort of my natural spot. So the big one was hiring an integrator. So we've got a brilliant CEO called Ben, and we now have a president in the US called Mary, and they both play that integrator role. So they run the business on a day-to-day basis. Which is just phenomenal, because that then frees me up to go after new business, work with the product team, work on strategy, like get over in the US and really understand the market and feed that back to the team and build the team in the US, and work with some of our big supplier partners. So it allows me to do what I do well, and then for them that's where their sweet spot. So that was just a game changer, and I think that's probably a ceiling on a lot of people's business once they get to that point and they just keep trying to do it all themselves. Like you're never going to grow your business to a decent size if you try to do it all yourself. So we the biggest learning is it's all about people, it's all about the team, and we simply wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the team, the people that are in it now, and then also the people that have been in our business and aren't with us anymore for whatever reason. And a lot of them have gone on to do really well, which is really rewarding. And I think generally, like, I did a post recently on LinkedIn, which was kind of spur of the moment, after a few beers in the airport waiting for a flight that then got cancelled, with one of our guys, Lewis. And Lewis is a great example of someone who joined our business from the ground up. Previously he'd been working for Halfords, big kind of car parts dealer or retailer, fixing bikes basically. He wanted to be a graphic designer, so he joined us on the bottom rung as a graphic designer. Quickly showed a lot of promise, particularly on the supply chain side, working with our print vendors. And we promoted into that position. He then did that. Then he joined our supply chain team, and he's done multiple jobs in there. He's now running a global supply chain. So he's working with print vendors all over the world. He's only 27. And he's currently in the US helping us to set up our supply chain team. He's there for a short period of time, get it up and running. And the kid's only 27. Yeah. Like, he could never have had that opportunity at another business. If he'd stay at Halfords, he'd be lucky if he was like the assistant store manager by now. Yeah. He's got huge amounts of responsibility. And I think that's the big benefit of having a smaller business, is that you can give people huge opportunities and huge responsibility that at a big company, you'd either never get or you'd be waiting a very long time.
It's interesting, just tying things back to what you said, thank you, a little bit earlier about when you were in Mars and you got put in to manage the Tesco account and it accelerated your career by quite some way. It's almost kind of gone full circle. But, you know, Lewis would be a good example of actually you've accelerated his career. You know, well, he's done it as well because he's kind of participated well in MRM. But, you know, that's the kind of example that we'll have hearing about of people who've just kind of gone on and just shown great promise. And
we've got loads of them in our business.
Yeah,
like people
sure.
that have come on this journey, and you know, they joined us when we were, 10, 15, 20 people in a startup shop where every desk was different and chairs were borrowed from the one next door and taking phone calls on the fire escape. And, they took a risk on us. They probably could have got a better job, paid more, more comfy environment somewhere else, but they chose to kind of jump on this journey. And we've got a lot of people, some of our team have been there for 7 years, I think is the longest. And we've got a lot around 6, 5 or 4 years. So they've been through this journey with me. They've been through the highs and the lows and stuck it out. And they've seen amazing progress in their careers. Like another person for us is a lady called Katie. She joined us as a project manager just as we won the Bacardi European deal. I was running it at the time, not particularly well. So I quickly passed it on to her. She did a phenomenal job and has continued to do really great implementations all over the world with different customers. She's now living in Miami, leading this project with Selling Glazers. So that's really rewarding, I think, to be able to create these opportunities and then see people take them and grow their careers as a result. Yeah. And that's probably the most rewarding part of leading this business.
So what's next? What's the future?
Well, so at the moment, obviously we're continuing to grow our core business. We're moving our existing customers over onto Hybo, onto the new platform. And our biggest focus is the US, right? So priority number one is to execute this contract with Southern Glazers. Obviously winning it is one thing, but delivering it is another, and arguably far harder. So we are 100% invested and committed to making that a success. And if that's successful, we know that it will lead to great things in that market. So we're already speaking to suppliers in that industry about potentially coming on board. We're now looking at some other distributors, some in wine and spirits, some in the beer trade, because we do that in Europe, but we don't do it in the US. And then there's a whole bunch of other kind of sectors, things like soft drinks, food service, desserts, and even pharmaceuticals. But at the moment, we've got so much on our plate with Southern and some of these near-term opportunities that there's plenty to go at if we stay within our current vertical. So that's the strategy really right now is to just dominate that space and be the market leader in marketing technology in the beverage alcohol industry. That's the mission.
But it must be exciting. I mean, the opportunity is huge in that vertical. But actually, as you say, I mean, having come from FMCG as well, that's the problems that you solve in drinks absolutely exist elsewhere in other markets.
Yeah.
So
well, we've seen it firsthand in other sectors, so we know it exists. Yeah. The alcohol one's specifically good for us because of its that fast turn of POS and promotions, but also it's regulated. So brand compliance and legal compliance are really, really important. So our customers take, the responsible marketing of alcohol very seriously, and that has to pass down through their POS. So you need a system to manage that. So that's our product really allows that customization and the compliance. You have to do both. And if anything, compliance is more important. So we look at other verticals with that same lens. So that's why like pharmaceuticals could be a good one because we've only started sort of just delving into it, but you've got large field sales teams, highly regulated products, needs brand consistency, similar problem. And then the bigger sort of addressable market that I'm looking at now is the wider POS problem. So POS is either created on demand by graphic designers or on a product like Hybo, or it's mass produced, where it's usually printed in China or Eastern Europe, shipped overseas in big tankers, gets delivered into a warehouse where it'll sit for several months. And then we know that 50 to 80% of it never gets used. Yeah, it becomes obsolete because they've either ordered too much or the event's passed or the customer sales reps didn't order it for whatever reason. So there is a massive waste issue in this industry, and not just in beverage alcohol, but multiple consumer goods industry, where there are warehouses full of POS that literally go to landfill every 3 months. They have to clear it out, make space for the more stuff coming in, and it gets sent to landfill or incinerated, and in some cases recycled. So that's a massive problem. One way to solve that is through on-demand. So the more orders we can do on-demand, you only order what you need when you need it. There's no warehousing, no mass production at all. But that only works for some products. Doesn't work for all products. So I'm now digging into the bigger problem of how do we solve it for those other products. And I've got a couple of good ideas on that, and I'm actively working on that at the moment. So there's a lot more to go at. We're only kind of really getting started. So it's a really exciting time.
Amazing.
Brilliant.
We ask all of our guests to kind of sum up your business experience. What is your guiding principle in business?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think for me, it's really about just being a good person. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I try and make sure that every interaction I have with someone, whether it's an employee, someone trying to interview for the company, a supplier, a customer, whoever it is, I always try and kind of do what I say I'm going to do, show up on time, and just be a good human, because you never know when that person's going to come back around, right? And we wouldn't get all those referrals and people proactively introducing us to some of the biggest companies in the world if it's because they didn't like us, right? And if we hadn't done a good thing. And if I hadn't helped that guy out with his podcast research, would I have ever got the intro to Southern Glazers? Probably not. So it's kind of what goes around comes around. It's a bit like karma. So when I'm sort of working with our commercial team, I'm always telling them, like, make every interaction just brilliant, and it will come back around tenfold. Might not be tomorrow, it could be several years, but it will come back around. And I always just think about what goes around comes around. So just put out, good things into the world, and good things will come back around.
Craig, thank you so much for sharing your story. It's fascinating, and good luck in the future.
Yeah, thanks very much. I've enjoyed it.
No, a great Scottish success story, and Scotland play England tomorrow. So hopefully another Scottish success story.
Well done,
Let's hope
Craig.
so. Cheers.
Cheers,
Thanks so
mate.
much.